Hey guys, welcome to today's video. Recently I found out this library called React Native Reanimated. So as this name suggests, it allows you to build animations within your React Native app. So let's get started. So within my projects folder, I want to start by creating an Expo application. So npx create-expo-app at latest, and then the name of my project. So I'll call it Reanimated Tutorial. Now let's wait for it to install. And then I'll navigate to my project. So to make sure, I want to use a development build. So I do npx expo install expo-dev-client. I want to make sure that my project runs on Android, so I'll simply go npx expo run Android. Now it's been done here. This is mostly errors related to my environment, but that doesn't really matter. Let's wait for it to compile. Cool. Within my machine, if I run scrcpy, I can see that my app is now successfully running. Let's now head to VS Code to write our first animation. Okay, so now that we have our project open, there's a lot of code that I would like to remove now. So first of all, I don't want the parallax scroll view component, and then I'll go scroll down here as well. Anything related to themed views, all of this we don't need either. First things first, I have to install all of my dependencies. So I close this and then npm install react-native-reanimated and then react-native-worklets. When that's done, after this, I would like to pre-build. So npx expo pre-build. And then here again, to restart my app, npm run start. Now it's been running. I press R for refreshing and it's running. So to create our first animation, I would first have to import animated from React Native Animated. And here I would have to create an animated view. To create an animated view, animated.view, and then I can have a style. So for a style, within my style sheet or create function, I can do animated view style. Here I would like to have a width of 120, a height of 120 as well. I want my component to be rounded, so border radius of 20 units and a vertical margin as well of 50 units. Anyways, going back up, I would like to apply these styles. So style, styles dot animated view style, and then I end this component. Of course, I forgot to add my background color. So background color, let's set it to green. Cool, now I have my background color. So as our first animation, let's first create a button that when clicked will move this box to the right. So first of all, I would like to have my button. So button, and then I import it. Title, let's set it to go to the right. Okay, now I have my button. So let's first create a variable called const translate x. So basically this will be the x position of this component. So normally maybe you might think that we have to use a useState variable that would modify the position, but that's not how it works in React Native Reanimated. We have to use something else called useSharedValue. So as the name suggests, this value is shared, or this variable is shared between the JavaScript code and the UI related code. So since we're using TypeScript, I set it to number and then my initial value, so 0. Then I would like to set a handler function for my button. So const handle press. And when the user presses it, I want this translate x value to increment itself by 50 units. But notice that we have an error here. This is because translate x is not just any other number. It has a certain property called value. So this is how you set the value of the translate x variable. Let's now pass it to my button. So on press, handle press. That's it. So if I click on the button, nothing really happens. This is because I didn't pass this translate x variable. So let's pass it to my view now. So I wrap it in another curly braces. I use the spread operator because I want to use all of these styles, and then I extend the style. So transform, then a square bracket, and then a curly bracket, then translate x, set it to translate x. That's it. So if I click on it, as you can see, my view now goes to the right. But notice that there's no animation. Let's add an animation now. So basically, Reanimated comes with a series of inbuilt functions to create an animation. So in this case, since I want to animate my translate x variable, I can remove this part, and then there's a function called withSpring, which allows for a spring animation. And then here I translate x.value plus 50, and then I fix my imports. So this means that whatever value I have via the spring animation, I increment its value by 50 units. So if I press R to refresh this code, and then within my phone here, if I click on this, notice that now I have an animation. So great, you've now built your first animation. You can even change the opacity of this component. So I'll create another variable called opacity, use shared value, again a number, which should be 0. So within my function here, I can change the opacity of value as well. So with spring, so I want to check if opacity.value was 1. If it was 1, I would set it to 0.5. So 50% opacity. I have to add a question mark. Otherwise, I set it to 1. So let's set its default value to 1. And then I pass in this value like so. So opacity. That's it. Let's now test it out. As you can see, whenever I click on this button, there's an animation in the opacity as well. So notice that using inline styles, it can get a bit messy. So one important thing about programming is that you want to keep your code as clean as possible. This brings us to our next topic, where you learn how to consolidate all of these styles within a single hook. So how do I do that? So here I create a variable, I call it const animated styles. So to consolidate our styles within one single place, Reanimated has a function or a hook called useAnimatedStyle. So here I can set, for example, my transform or my translate value. Here it's transform, so I set it to transform, and basically I get to copy all of this code here. So it needs a little fixing. So translate x of value, and then same with the opacity as well. So opacity, again I set it to a spring function. So there's some duplicated code. What I'll do is I set it to plus 50. So increment this value by plus 50. And I can remove this with spring function, because from now onwards all of our animations are being handled by this hook. So with spring here as well I have to add. Next I would want to remove this as well. I don't want it to be duplicated, and now I want to pass it to this view. So I remove this, and here I can do a square bracket, remove the 3 dots, save, and then I pass in my animated style. So if everything's right, there should be no change. Great, as you can see our code still works. Let's now move on. So Reanimated also introduces a series of modifiers. Some of them we'll discuss here in this video. So first off, let's discover the withTiming function. So here, according to the description, it allows you to create an animation based on the duration and the timing of your animation. So if I go back, I can change it to withTiming, the opacity.value, so the value of this variable, and then my config, so curly braces, and then I want the duration of this animation to be 1000 milliseconds or 1 second. And if I want, I can also have easing. So I could have easing as easing.inout, easing.what. That's it. If I click now, I get an error. This is mainly because easing should not be part of React Native. Rather, it should be part of the React Native Reanimated package. Clicking again. Now, as you can see, if I go to the right, it takes 1 second for this animation to end. Similarly, you can even get this animation to repeat as well. Basically, you can have as many modifiers as you want. So to repeat your animation, I can go with repeat. I wrap this animation in curly braces or just brackets, sorry, and then the number of repetitions. So let's say 10. So I want this animation to repeat 10 times, and whether I want to reverse it. Let's just do false for now. I click it now. Notice that my animation is now reversing this time, but there's no transition back to its original state. To get the transition, I can just go true. So go to the right. If I click now there's a smooth transition from back to forth. Great. So far, so good. Let's now learn about gestures. So the library has support for gestures, some of which we'll now discuss. Let's first start with a tap gesture. So what I can do here, I can first define my gesture. So const tap and then gesture.tap. I need to fix my import here. The gesture has to be imported from my React Native gesture handler package, and I want to continue configuring my gesture. So on begin, so when the user has begun the tap gesture, so we should have a value that should change every time the user taps on a button. So I'll call it pressed, and it should be a useShared value of type boolean. By default it's going to be false. So anyways, press.value should be true, and when the tap gesture has completed, I want it back to go false. So on finalize, press not value as false. Let's now pass this tap gesture to this component. So within animated.styles, let's set another property. So let's say background color. So if the user has pressed this component, let's set it to white. Otherwise, if the user is not pressing on this component, we can set it to blue. So it's now been set to blue. But notice that every time I click or I tap on this component, nothing really happens. This is because I haven't completely configured my gestures yet. So scrolling down, I have to wrap this in a component called gesture handler root view. Let's go back here. Let's give it a style, so flex of 1. And then I want to pass in my tap variable. So gesture detector, so detect my gestures, and I wrap my Animated.view component like so, and then I pass in my gesture. So it was the tap gesture. So notice that every time I tap, the color of this component changes, but there's not really an animation. So let's scroll up and change it to with spring. Testing it again. As you can see, now there's a little animation every time I click on this component. We can even do pan gestures as well. Scrolling up, let's configure a pan gesture. So const pan gesture.tap, sorry, not tap, gesture.pan. So on begin, again, I want the press.value to be true. I can even set an on change event. So every time the user's finger or their pointer changes positions, the on change event gets triggered. So it has an event callback which contains the position of the user's pointer. So I said translate x.value to event.translationx. And then in the end, on finalize, when that's done, I want to reset the translate x value and set press.value to false. So now I would like to pass in my pan gesture to my gesture detector. So testing it out, notice that every time I drag my component and if I fling it or flick it, it hops back into its position. I can drag it, but if I let go, it will hop back. We can even change the y component. So it's basically really simple. So const translate y, use shared value again, number as 0. Here, so on change, translate y.value as event.translationy, and basically the same thing. So translation y.value as 0, and going down to my animated styles, here translate y to translate, or with spring, translate y.value. So basically now I expect my component to be draggable around the whole screen. Letting go, it should spring back into its own position. There's another modifier that I would like to introduce here called withDecay. So basically it allows you to create animations with some friction attached to it. So let's use our pan gesture to create a withDecay animation. So basically here within our pan event, my idea is that whenever the user stops dragging, I want some friction. I want this component to move ahead, but with some friction or deceleration, so to speak. And I'll apply this within our translate x value. So let's use it now. So withDecay, and then I remove this. Let's set the velocity. So I want the velocity to be the user's velocity. Like with what speed they were dragging this component, let's give some lesser velocity here. So I'll divide it by 2. I would want a rubber band effect. So rubber band effect, let's set it to true. First, I would like to fix my imports as well. Anyways, let's now add the missing parameters. The last one is the clamp. So the maximum bounds of this translate x value. So let's set it to 0, and then some magic numbers. Let's do 200. So this means that I'm using the withDecay function, and I'm basically telling Reanimated to limit the value from between 0 to 200. So if I drag it this time, it's not really going around on the x-axis. I've made an error here. So basically this code was meant to go to the on finalize, which makes sense because this means that I want this animation, or I want this deceleration to happen when the gesture is ended. So event on finalize here, event here. I basically, this doesn't work because I haven't configured the on change event properly. So translate x dot value to event dot change x. I basically increment it by the changes in the x position. So now, as you can see, whenever I drag this around with a lot of speed, there's some deceleration happening. And if I flick it all the way to the left, notice that it comes back using a rubber band effect. We also have access to scroll events, so let's do that now. So for scroll events, I'll create another component. I'll say scrollDemo.tsx. Here, I would like to use AI to write some of my boilerplate code. Here I would like to start and end my view components, and basically since I want to demonstrate a scroll event in Reanimated, I would need a lot of text. So going back to my browser here, I would use the lorem ipsum generator, generate lorem ipsum, and then I copy all of this. Copy. Going back to VS Code, I create a text component, fix my imports once again, not needed, then I paste. I would now like to fix my code here. So between my text components, I enter all of my text. Cool, now I would like to fix my imports. So React Native, and then it should be text. Now I'll go back to index.tsx, and then I'll display my text component or my scroll demo component. So scroll demo. Okay, it's now being displayed here. So I would go back and assign it some styles. So on styles as style sheet. Create. Let's do a container. Let's give it a flex of 1 and align items to center. I need to import my style sheet. So style sheet, and then assign my style here. Styles.container. Next, I would like to give my text a whiter color. So text of color white. Going back up, let's assign it. Styles.text. Okay, so now I have some text here. This is a lot of text now, but I would like to make it scrollable. So I have to wrap this view as Animated.ScrollView. Let's go back down. And then I'll wrap this text component with my Animated.ScrollView component. And as you can see, now I can scroll. But now I would like to add some buttons that will allow the user to scroll. So let's create a button like so. So button, and let's give it a title. So first of all, it's going to be scroll up, and let's create another button. Let's do scroll down. So for now, they don't really do anything. So I would like to handle my scroll position. So just as before, let's now assign a little variable or a value called scroll value as use shared value. Of course, TypeScript, so it's a number. The default value is going to be 0. And then I'll create another function. I'll say scroll by. Scroll.value should be incremented by the value, which is the parameter, and it should be a number. I made an error here. Let's do scroll value.value. And then I would like to pass in this handler here. So on press scroll by, let's do 20. I would like to fix my code like so. I'd like to give myself some space here, so I close this, and then on press scroll by, and then let's do -20 here. So for now, they don't really do anything even if I click on them. Now I would like to pass in the scroll value. So how do I do it? So the first step should be to write some code to access this scroll view. To do so, I have to create a ref. But since this is reanimated, I have to create an animated ref. So let's call it scroll ref and use animated ref. By default, it's null, but the type of this should be animated.scrollView. And then I would like to pass in this ref like so. So ref as scroll ref. That's it. So how do I connect my scroll value and scroll ref together? There's another hook called use derived value. So what this hook does, it computes a new value based on an existing value. So anyways, let's write some code again. So use derived value, and then the callback should be scrollTo, which comes from the reanimated library, not from the built-in function. So please keep that in mind. And then the ref, so scroll ref, and then how many units we want to scroll on the x-axis. In this case, it's 0 since we want to do it vertically. How many units on the y-axis. So basically, which is stored in the scroll value variable, and whether it should be animated. Yes, we would like it to be animated. Let's now test this out. If I click on scroll up, okay, so now scrolling down, looks like I made an error here. These values should be interchanged, so minus here and then plus here. So if I do scroll down, now it's scrolling down. Great, but these values are too small, so I'll multiply these values by 10. So if I scroll up, now it's scrolling up way better. But notice that if I press scroll up many times, scroll down doesn't work unless I press scroll down numerous times as well. So basically, let's now handle this code. So within my function here, I would like to specify that I want to clamp the scroll value between two numbers. So let's do it now. So here I would check if scroll value plus value, oops, I have to add value here. If it's more than, let's give it another magic number, let's say 80 in this case. So I limit this variable to just 80. Otherwise, if scroll value dot value plus value once again, if it is less than 10, then I would like to set it to 0. Scroll value dot value and set it to 0. So let's now refresh this code. Okay, so if I scroll down, notice that's now working fine. And if I press scroll down numerous times, nothing really happens. If I press scroll up, now it's working just fine. If I press scroll up numerous times and then press scroll down, it's scrolling down perfectly. We can even shorten this code even more. So let's do it like so. So scroll value dot minimum. So basically I want it to be the minimum between this computation and 80. So 80 here. Whoops, I've changed it to 90. So 80 here, and scroll dot value plus value. I made this mistake again, so dot value. And then again, I've decided to math.max. So basically the minimum bound should be 0, but the maximum bound should be the minimum of these two computations or these two values. Basically now this code is redundant. Let's now try again. So scroll down, it's scrolling up fine. And if I scroll up, it can scroll up fine. Nice. As you can see, our code works. So that's it for today. In this tutorial, you learned the basics of React Native Reanimated. You learned how to create your first animation, and you also learned how to create modifiers or modifier animations. And furthermore, you also learned about the fundamentals of scroll events in Animated. That's it for today. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comment section. Till then, bye bye.